What happened next on CNN left Lindsey Graham completely speechless and may have just ended his political commentary comeback before it even started. The 68-year-old senator walked into that Washington studio thinking he could bulldoze Jonathan Roumie with decades of political experience. He launched a brutal attack on his background, calling him just another actor playing politician. But Roumie hadn't come to take insults. Armed with his deep understanding of faith, leadership, and social responsibility, the 42-year-old actor was about to deliver a masterclass in moral clarity that would leave Graham frozen in his chair and the entire room stunned into silence. Before we dive into this epic showdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these incredible moments. Comment below where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story reaches. This wasn't just a debate. This was the moment a passionate actor and advocate dismantled one of the most powerful men in American politics live on national television. And what he pulled out next left everyone in that CNN studio absolutely shocked. To understand why this confrontation was so explosive, you need to know exactly who these two political heavyweights really are and why this battle mattered so much. This is a man who served as a U.S. Senator for over 30 years, a key figure in military and foreign policy debates, and one of the loudest voices in defense of controversial wars abroad. Lindsey Graham built his reputation as the ultimate Washington insider, the man who operated behind the scenes with an iron fist. His political career spans decades, from the Clinton era through the Trump administration. He's used to being the smartest guy in the room, the one who makes or breaks careers with a single word. But here's the thing about Graham, he's also become a divisive figure in his own party. After spending years backing Trump's policies and supporting his actions, many Democrats see him as a relic of the old guard. Republicans are divided and his credibility has been tainted by the changing tides in Washington. He's a man without a political home, trying to rebuild his relevance in a more progressive America. At just 42 years old, Jonathan Roumie represents everything Graham's generation fought against. Young, unapologetically passionate about social justice, and actively engaging with the issues that matter today. Roumie is best known for his powerful performances on screen, but he is also deeply committed to raising awareness for issues like human trafficking, inequality, and the importance of empathy in leadership. He has spent his career using his platform for good, connecting with millions to share messages of compassion and understanding. Graham represents the old system: white, male, wealthy, connected, used to being obeyed without question. Roumie represents the new generation: diverse, educated, determined to challenge every assumption and demand accountability. The setting made it even more dramatic. Studio, cameras rolling, millions watching at home. Graham had agreed to this joint appearance, thinking he could use his experience and gravitas to put this young actor in his place. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. The topic was supposed to be about leadership and experience in the modern world, something Graham felt confident discussing. After all, he had spent decades influencing foreign policy, national security, and military matters. What could this actor possibly teach him about leadership? He was about to find out the hard way that underestimating Jonathan Roumie was the biggest mistake of his political comeback attempt. The tension started building the moment both men settled into their chairs under the bright CNN studio light. Host Anderson Cooper introduced them with his usual professional tone, but you could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't going to be a polite political discussion. Graham, dressed in his perfectly pressed suit and tie, looked every bit the embodiment of establishment power. When Cooper asked about leadership and the qualities needed for high office, Graham saw his opening. "Well, Anderson," Graham began, his voice carrying that southern drawl that had commanded boardrooms and Senate floors for years. "We need to be realistic about what real experience looks like. I've seen some of these new faces in Congress, and frankly, I'm concerned." He paused dramatically, his eyes shifting toward Roumie with barely concealed disdain. "Take Jonathan here," Graham continued. "Sure, he's an actor. Lots of people act, but what has he actually done? Played a few parts on screen, and now he thinks he's qualified to speak on leadership, foreign policy, or the economy." The studio fell quiet except for the hum of the camera. Roumie sat perfectly still, his expression calm, but his eyes never left Graham's window. But Graham wasn't done. He was just getting warmed up, and his next words would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation. "Look," Graham continued, "I don't want to be unkind, but we're talking about the difference between real-world experience and what? Pretending to be a leader in movies? That's not leadership. That's entertainment. A few people in the studio exchanged glances, sensing the tension rise. Roumie remained perfectly composed, his demeanor unwavering. This was getting personal fast. I've worked with some of the finest political minds in America, senators, governors, national security officials, and I can tell you there's a big difference between someone who's genuinely affected lives and someone who's more interested in making headlines than actually leading, Graham said. Throughout Graham's attack, Jonathan Roumie remained completely composed. He didn't interrupt, didn't fidget, didn't show any sign that his words were affecting him. If anything, he seemed to be taking mental notes, filing away each insult for future use. When Anderson Cooper turned to him for a response, Roumie simply smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile a prosecutor gives a defendant who's just confessed on the witness stand. "Mr. Graham," Roumie began, his voice steady and clear, "I appreciate you sharing your perspective on leadership experience." "It's interesting," he said, interpreting Graham's calm response as weakness. Graham decided to press his advantage. This was his fatal error. "Interesting," Graham scoffed. "Mr. Roumie, with all due respect, interesting doesn't cut it when you're dealing with matters of national importance. I've been in rooms where decisions were made that affected the lives of millions of people. I've worked with presidents, prime ministers, generals. I've helped shape policy that kept America safe for decades." He leaned forward, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made several people in the studio cringe. "Your experience is what? Playing a part on TV and talking about morality? That's not the kind of experience that prepares you for national leadership. That's acting with a moral compass." Even the CNN crew members, who had seen thousands of political interviews over the years, knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Graham had just crossed a line that you don't cross with someone like Jonathan Roumie. Anderson Cooper, veteran journalist that he is, recognized the moment for what it was. His eyebrows raised slightly as he turned to Roumie. "Mr. Roumie, your response?" Roumie, his voice still calm but with a sharp edge, replied, "Mr. Graham, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you suggesting that standing up for human dignity and the values we cherish isn't real leadership? That standing up for the oppressed isn't leadership?" Before Graham could answer, Roumie continued, "Because if that's your position, I think the viewers should know exactly what kind of leadership you consider legitimate." Graham dismissed him with a wave. "I'm talking about the difference between idealistic notions and real-world politics, Mr. Roumie. There's a difference between standing on a stage acting like a leader and actually being responsible for national policy and security." Roumie nodded slowly, considering his words carefully. "That's a very specific view of leadership, Mr. Graham. Very specific indeed." Behind the cameras, our sub-producers were frantically taking notes. They could sense that this was something special, something that would be replayed for years to come. The tension in the studio was thick. Roumie paused, and in that pause, everyone in the room could sense that something big was about to happen. It was the kind of moment that separates average politicians from legendary ones, when someone decides to go for the kill shot instead of playing it safe. "I'm curious, though," Roumie continued, leaning forward slightly. "Since you are so concerned about leadership and experience, maybe we should talk about your own career. After all, if we're going to judge leaders by their track record, shouldn't we examine everyone in the room?" The camera operators instinctively zoomed in on Graham's face. His confident smirk faltered for just a moment. His eyes widened slightly, enough to show that he realized he might be in trouble. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Graham's confident smirk faltered before returning, but it was too late. The damage was done. The hunter had become the hunted. And Jonathan Roumie had him exactly where he wanted him. Anderson Cooper leaned forward in his chair, recognizing that he was about to witness something historic. This wasn't just another political interview anymore. This was becoming a masterclass in political warfare. What happened next would go down as one of the most devastating political takedowns in television history. Jonathan Roumie was about to deliver a masterclass in how to destroy an opponent using nothing but facts, moral clarity, and perfect timing. Roumie straightened in his chair. Suddenly, his entire demeanor changed. The calm actor was gone, replaced by the advocate who had spent years fighting for the rights of others, standing up to the powerful with nothing but the truth. "Mr. Graham," Roumie said, his voice now cutting through the tension, "since you've made this about leadership qualifications, let's examine the facts. You mentioned the importance of real-world experience. I haven't been in the halls of power, and I haven't made policy decisions that affected millions, but I have fought for people who had no voice. I've defended the vulnerable and spoken out against injustice. I've stood in front of those who needed a leader to show them that their rights matter. He paused for effect and then delivered the first devastating blow. I've actually practiced leadership every single day in my life, trying to make this world a better place, with real consequences, not by defending policies that harm the very people I am supposed to protect. The silence in the studio was deafening. Now, Mr. Graham, Roumie continued, his voice gaining strength, I'm curious about your leadership background. You've spent a lot of time talking about real-world experience tonight. So tell me and tell the American people, when exactly did you lead a real fight for people who had no power? When did you challenge the system for the greater good? Graham's confident expression cracked. For the first time in the interview, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. I've led in the Senate through policy, he stammered. Roumie cut in smoothly. But that wasn't my question. You spent years defending systems that hurt vulnerable communities. How many lives have you changed, Mr. Graham? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Graham shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I think we need to go to commercial, Anderson Cooper said, recognizing that his guest was in meltdown mode. But the cameras kept rolling, and viewers at home watched Graham slump in his chair, utterly defeated. It was over, and everyone knew it. But that wasn't my question. You've spent the last several minutes questioning my qualifications as an advocate, so I'm asking about yours. When did you practice, Mr. Graham? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Anderson Cooper leaned forward slightly, recognizing that his guest was in serious trouble. I have worked with some of the finest political minds in America, senators, governors, national security officials. I've shaped policies that affect millions, Graham finally stammered, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. That's wonderful, Roumie replied with mock enthusiasm. A career in politics? I have one of those too. But again, that's not what I asked. When did you lead a true fight for people in need? What was your career like before you moved straight into Washington politics? And Jonathan Roumie was just getting started. Let me help you out, Mr. Graham. You served as a senator for decades, but instead of using your platform to lead for the vulnerable, you built your power by playing political games. You never fought for the voiceless. You never represented the oppressed. You've spent your life in back rooms making deals, not standing up for people who needed help. Roumie continued with surgical precision. The room was dead silent. Every camera focused on Graham's face as the color drained from it. CNN's control room was in chaos. The director was frantically switching camera angles, trying to capture every nuance of Graham's crumbling composure. Stay on his face, he whispered into his headset. This is television gold. In the studio, you could hear a pin drop. The usual bustling energy of a live TV production was replaced by an almost religious silence, as if everyone understood they were witnessing something historic. The complete dismantling of a political figure. You see, Mr. Graham, Roumie continued, his voice gaining strength, when you sit here and question my qualifications, when you dismiss my work, you're doing so as someone who has literally never done what I've done. I have more real-life experience in fighting for justice in a courtroom than you have accumulated in your entire career. He paused, letting the full weight of that statement sink in. The camera caught Graham's Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled to swallow. His hands, which had been gesturing confidently just minutes before, now gripped the arms of his chair, a sign that he was losing control. In fact, Mr. Graham, Roumie continued, his voice now full of power, I have fought for people's rights in courtrooms, won cases that affected entire communities. I've led the charge for equality and civil rights. You've spent your time defending systems that work for the powerful, and you have never once been held accountable for your actions. Graham, taken aback, tried to interrupt, but Roumie raised his hand calmly. I'm not finished, Mr. Graham. You mentioned policy decisions that shape the nation, but let's talk about the real consequences of those decisions. You were involved in pushing legal policies that led to the detention of innocent people, supported military intervention that violated international law, and you justified actions that hurt our own citizens. Now tell me, how many of those decisions stood up to scrutiny? Graham tried to speak, but Roumie continued, your decisions were challenged in courts, federal courts, appellate courts, and yes, even the Supreme Court you claim to respect. They ruled against them over and over again. Roumie pulled out a small notebook, a gesture that sent chills through the CNN production team. Here, Mr. Graham, let me give you some facts. The policies you champion They were struck down time and again by the courts. The Supreme Court ruled that the detention policies you defended violated due process. They ruled that your policies in Guantanamo were illegal. Your military commission system was overturned because it violated human rights, and you defended torture. The studio remained silent, the gravity of Roumie's words hanging in the air. "Should I continue?" Roumie asked, his eyes blazing. "I've got pages of Supreme Court decisions that declared your policies unconstitutional." Graham, now visibly shaken, couldn't respond. Roumie leaned forward slightly, his next words cutting through the tension. "So when you question my legal qualifications, you're doing so as someone who has never practiced law, never represented clients, and whose legal theories were rejected by the very courts you hold so dear." Then Roumie took a moment to make it personal, but in the most professional way possible. "You know what the difference is between us, Mr. Graham? When I fought for justice, I won. I fought for people's civil rights, for voting rights, for fair treatment under the law. My work helped change lives. Your work, on the other hand, defended policies that harmed the very people you were supposed to protect." Roumie's voice gained intensity as he continued. "And it wasn't just about winning cases, Mr. Graham. It was about understanding what the law actually means. When I represented clients, I didn't argue from political talking points. I built my cases on decades of legal precedent. I worked with the Constitution, not against it." He looked directly at Graham. "My legal work has been validated by courts across the country, Mr. Graham. Your legal legacy is a series of rulings that said you were wrong, and your theories were used to justify torture and unconstitutional actions. And when real lawyers like me challenged you, we beat you every single time." Anderson Cooper, despite his years of experience, was stunned by the precision of Roumie's dismantling of Graham's career. He had interviewed presidents, dictators, and world leaders, but nothing compared to this moment. Roumie, with surgical precision, had done what few in politics could: expose the flaws of a seasoned politician in front of millions, and all with nothing but the truth. "You're absolutely right, there is a difference. Local leadership is when you use your platform to inspire and advocate for the people who need it most. High-stakes leadership is when your actions and decisions shape the lives of millions and get tested under scrutiny," Jonathan Roumie said, pausing for maximum impact. "The difference is, I've led by example. You failed to lead in any meaningful way." He leaned forward, his voice growing stronger with every word. "I fought for justice. You've been part of the system that perpetuates the very problems we face today. My work with communities and grassroots organizations has had real consequences. You, on the other hand, have supported policies that caused harm." The silence in the studio was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. Lindsey Graham, the man who had intimidated countless political opponents, sat frozen, his face pale. His hands were shaking slightly, and for the first time in his career, he had absolutely nothing to say. Anderson Cooper, veteran of thousands of interviews, struggled to find words. The production crew stood motionless behind the camera, and the entire room understood they had just witnessed something historic: the complete and total destruction of one of the most powerful political figures in American history. And Jonathan Roumie sat there calmly, like he was just getting started. "Did you have a response to that, Mr. Graham?" he asked politely. Graham didn't respond. For the first time in his career, Lindsey Graham was speechless. The moment Jonathan Roumie finished speaking, you could feel the entire political world shift on its axis. This wasn't just about one devastating interview. It was the birth of a new political superstar and the final humiliation of an old guard legend. His face had gone completely pale, and his hands visibly trembled as he reached for his water glass. When Anderson Cooper tried to give him a chance to respond, Graham could only manage a weak, "Those are complex issues." This man, who had once been called the most powerful senator in American history, couldn't even form a complete sentence. Roumie had dismantled him so thoroughly that his legendary political instincts had completely shut down. "I think we need to go to commercial," Anderson Cooper finally said, recognizing that his guest was in complete meltdown mode. But the cameras kept rolling for a few more seconds, and viewers at home watched Graham slump in his chair like a deflated balloon. It was over, and everyone knew it. Before the interview even ended, social media erupted. The first clips hit Twitter within minutes, and the reaction was immediate and massive. "Roumie destroys Graham" started trending within 10 minutes. Hashtag #NeverLed followed shortly after, with the hashtag #YouFailed repeatedly shared as people recounted the devastating moments when Roumie dismantled Graham's arguments. The speed of the social media response was unprecedented. Within the first hour, the interview clips had been viewed over 2 million times across all platforms. TikTok users were already creating reaction videos, with young political commentators particularly vocal about Roumie's performance. "This is what we call getting schooled," posted one law school graduate, adding fire emoji. Instagram stories exploded with clips of the most devastating moment. The sequence where Roumie calmly listed Graham's failures, while Graham sat frozen, became an instant meme template with captions like, "When you realize you just brought a knife to a policy fight, an actor versus a career politician with no real results." The posts were generating thousands of comments, with politicians and lawyers sharing their own stories of professional takedowns. Perhaps even more significant than the social media explosion was the reaction from the legal community. Lawyers across the political spectrum began weighing in, and their response was overwhelming. "Jonathan Roumie just gave Lindsey Graham the most precise and devastating legal argument I've ever seen on television," tweeted Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe. "Every claim was precise. Every citation was accurate. This is what happens when someone who knows what they're talking about faces someone who's just been playing politics." Even conservative legal scholars had to acknowledge the power of Roumie's argument. "I disagree with Roumie's politics, but his legal argument was devastating and accurate," posted a former Bush administration lawyer. The American Bar Association's Twitter account even posted a thread breaking down each of Roumie's citations, confirming that every single claim was correct. "When lawyers fact-check lawyers live on TV, it's as real as it gets," they wrote. "Roumie just showed America what real legal expertise looks like." Progressive organizations were thrilled, with many taking to Twitter to say, "This is why we need leaders like Jonathan Roumie. He didn't just win this debate. He exposed decades of Republican hypocrisy about leadership and expertise." But perhaps the most telling response came from Republicans. Many simply stayed silent, acknowledging that there was no defending Graham's performance. A few tried to argue that his political experience was more valuable than advocacy and legal expertise. But those arguments fell flat when experts pointed out that even in government, one must understand the law to make informed decisions. One Republican strategist privately told reporters that this was a disaster. "You can't question someone's qualifications when you've never been on the front lines yourself. And you certainly can't do it to someone who clearly knows more about leadership than you." Conservative media outlets found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't defend Graham's performance because it was indefensible. They couldn't attack Roumie's arguments because they were factually accurate. And they couldn't ignore the story because it was dominating every news cycle. Fox News initially tried to frame it as a heated exchange between political opponents, but even their anchors seemed uncomfortable with that spin. When experts confirmed that Roumie's citations were all correct, the narrative shifted to focus on Graham's decades of service rather than his qualifications to lead. Some conservative commentators tried a different approach, arguing that practical political experience was more valuable than moral leadership and advocacy. But this backfired when Democratic surrogates pointed out that Roumie had both a successful legal career and experience in public life. For Lindsey Graham personally, the aftermath was brutal. This was supposed to be his political comeback moment, his chance to reassert his relevance in the changing landscape of American politics. Instead, it became a public humiliation that effectively ended any hope of a return to political prominence. Within days, several planned media appearances were quietly canceled. A scheduled speech at a Republican fundraiser was postponed indefinitely. Even his daughter, Liz Graham, no stranger to political combat, reportedly told friends that her father had walked into a buzzsaw. More damaging than the immediate humiliation was the long-term impact on Graham's legacy. For decades, he had been seen as a master of political combat, someone who could destroy opponents with superior knowledge and experience. But Roumie shattered that image completely. Political analysts began discussing the interview as a watershed moment, the night when the old guard finally met their match in the new generation of politicians. Graham represented everything that was wrong with the old Republican establishment. One analyst wrote, Roumie showed what happens when that establishment faces someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Roumie's congressional office was flooded with interview requests from major networks. Speaking invitations poured in from law schools, civil rights organizations, and Democratic groups across the country. But perhaps most significantly, his fundraising exploded. Small dollar donations flooded in from across the country, with many donors specifically mentioning the Graham interview. "I've never donated to a politician before," read one typical message. but after watching you destroy Lindsey Graham with facts and logic, I had to contribute. Democratic leadership took notice immediately. Within a week, Roumie was invited to join several high-profile committees and was being discussed as a potential candidate for Senate or even higher office in the future. Beyond the immediate political ramifications, the Roumie-Graham confrontation represented something much larger, a changing of the guard in American politics. For too long, political debates had been dominated by powerful men who relied on their reputations and connections rather than actual leadership and expertise. Roumie showed that the new generation of politicians, younger, more diverse, more educated, wasn't going to be intimidated by past reputations. They were going to demand that political leaders actually know what they're talking about. Legal educators began using the interview as a teaching tool, showing law students how to construct devastating arguments using precise citations in logical progression. This is what real legal advocacy looks like, one professor told his class. Every claim supported by evidence, every argument building on the last one, every conclusion inevitable. 6 months later, the Roumie-Graham interview is still being discussed in political science and law school classes across the country. It's been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms, making it one of the most watched political interviews in recent history. More importantly, it changed how political debates are conducted. Candidates now come much better prepared, knowing that a single factual error or unsupported claim could lead to viral humiliation. The era of getting by on reputation alone is over. For Jonathan Roumie, the interview established him as one of the most effective communicators in the Democratic Party. He's become the go-to person for legal and constitutional issues, with his opinions sought on everything from Supreme Court nominations to civil rights legislation. Lindsey Graham, meanwhile, has largely retreated from public life. The man who once shaped American foreign policy now rarely gives interviews, and when he does, he sticks carefully to prepared talking points. The spontaneous, combative style that once made him feared has been replaced by obvious caution. It was about competence, triumphing over reputation, preparation defeating assumption, and the new generation proving they belonged at the highest levels of American politics. Roumie didn't just win a debate, he delivered a masterclass in how to use legal expertise, factual precision, and perfect timing to dismantle an opponent completely. He showed that in the age of social media and instant fact-checking, you can't rely on old tricks and intimidation tactics. Most importantly, he proved that when you come for someone's qualifications, you better make sure your own house is in order. Because if it's not, you might find yourself frozen in your chair, speechless, while a 42-year-old actor and advocate schools you on leadership and constitutional law in front of the entire nation. That's what real leadership looks like. What an incredible moment we just witnessed. Jonathan Roumie's masterful takedown of Lindsey Graham is a perfect example of how the new generation of leaders is reshaping American politics. This wasn't just a debate, it was a game-changing moment where competence triumphed over reputation and facts destroyed political rhetoric. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss these explosive political moments. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts on this historic showdown. What was your favorite part of Roumie's devastating argument? Stay tuned for more in-depth analyses that challenge the status quo and bring you the most impactful moments in politics today. See you in the next video.